The Buffalo Bills signed a wide receiver on Wednesday, Mack Hollins, and a lot of people are like, who? Well, I'm here to tell you that he is better than you think. We're going to talk about him and a lot more Bills stuff going on. Starting right now on Talking Buffalo.
Welcome to Talking Buffalo, featuring conversations with guests from around the world of sports, media, pop culture, and all things Buffalo. With your host, Patrick Moran.
All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo sports talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you very much for listening, for watching, for following, for subscribing. Appreciate you more than you could possibly know. This is our Thursday show, and I am joined right now for the first time in a couple weeks, man. Been on the road working, making a living, not being on Talking Buffalo, though, but he's here today, man. My man from Buffalo Rumblings, Anthony Marino. What's going on, dude? How you doing?
It's good to be back, man. I don't like these prolonged absences that we have of doing the show. I feel like it's been way too long.
I don't like it either, because then I end up scrambling to try to find some shows and some ideas and some content and some guests, so on. I kind of got in that nice little comfort zone with you. Yeah, we got a lot to talk about today. As I said, it's been a couple weeks. Last time we talked was, I think, two and a half weeks ago. A little bit before free agency. In fact, I know that you were on the road last week, so weren't on the show when Black Wednesday, I guess we'll call it, happened with Trey White and Mitch Morse, and Jordan Poyer. That's kind of old news right now, and they've already found new teams, but obviously a big week with free agency. Let me ask you this, though, before we dive into what the Bills have done so far through free agency, which, by the way, is this day 3 of free agency? Is this day one? It's day one. Is it really? Is it really? Come on.
It's day one. Technically, it's day one. I mean, if you want to count the legal tampering period, but, really from that, what are we recording this on Wednesday? Today at 4 p.m. Eastern time was when free agency started. So
right.
It's technically been like 5.5 hours. Right.
Fair enough. Well, let me ask you this. Scout's honor with you, because now you've already seen how things have played out over the first couple days of tampering in day one of free agency. What was your realistic expectation? What were you realistically hoping for? Which still might come to fruition, by the way. We're a day in, or a couple days in right now. But going into this period, because I didn't get to talk to you last week about it during our previous shows, what was your expectations or hopes with the Buffalo Bills going in?
Yeah, so my expectations going in was that they would sign one of AJ Epinesa or Daquan Jones, which they ended up signing both. Now, on the flip side with that, right? So to me, then that's made things a little bit less interesting so far. And again, right, like it's early, it's Wednesday, that they were going to get one of those guys and then maybe do something else, right? Something we didn't see coming, maybe someone in the $8 to $10 million a year range. You spread it out over 3 or 4 years. You can make it work for this year's salary cap, push money towards the end, whatever it is. But once they signed those two guys, it was just like, okay, yeah, it's been a little lackluster since then. And honestly, that's kind of okay, right? Like if you only signed one of the two and then you went out and got someone else, like, yeah, maybe there'd be this new exciting, toy to add to your roster. But in reality, it's like, okay, now you've taken care of a major hole at defensive tackle, a major hole at defensive end. And I think everybody can relax just a little bit if we're thinking realistically here.
Well, they did get a couple new presents, but kind of like opening up the presents and it's like socks or pajamas.
But listen, I will say this though. There was a small part of me, and I wanted Daquan Jones back 100%. But just for the fact to see how you would overreact to him signing someplace else. Because for weeks you had been saying like that was the only thing that you wanted. It was your number one priority. It was all this, this and that. And it was like, gosh, I honestly felt like when things got to, Monday at noon, when the tampering period opened and there hadn't been any sort of re-signing announced by the Bills in any way, shape, or form, then I was like, man, maybe he's going to go. And I'm like, Pat's going to have a freaking meltdown when we're on the show together, but crisis averted. Everything's good.
It was weird because I was following I follow him on Twitter, and he was tweeting a lot on Monday. Like he was
really
being like
was.
an analyst, like with AJ Epinesa, because he did get re-signed on Monday. He got all excited with exclamation points, and he was tweeting a lot. I tried tweeting at him. I had no success. I did one of those old high school, do you plan on sitting your ass out and all the way through OTAs and, kind of like Laval Joseph and Puna Ford and them did last year. And then I put up check yes or no, a graphic. He didn't respond. So I was like getting a little bit concerned. I'm like, it doesn't, this is day one of tampering, and he's on Twitter all day. So he's not talking to the Bills, although I'm sure his agent was handling all this shit. But anyway, so yeah, I taped the show on Monday night with Tone Pucks, waited as long as we possibly could. We didn't start taping at 9:30, which, by the way, for people who are watching and listening to this show, Anthony and I are doing the same thing tonight. We're taping this at 9:30. So if something nutty happens, like at the end of the night, 11:30, midnight, or through the night, we've already taped, and this is for Thursday's show. But anyway, I wrapped with Tone on Monday, hung out with him for a little bit here, stayed up probably till by the time I got done with the little post-production stuff of the show and hanging out with my wife and then going to bed. It was definitely after midnight. And I woke up at like 7:15 a.m., which is for me pretty early. Like my day normally starts at 8:30, 9 o'clock because I usually work pretty late into the night. And DaQuan Jones signed overnight. So being after dark or being like overnight, I guess, struck again. Yeah, he was absolutely my number one priority. I mean, I'm not going to take a victory lap for it, but yeah, I was very happy. I had a realistic wish list of 5 things. 2 of them are new guys, 3 were re-signings. I wanted DaQuan, I wanted AJ Epinesa, and I remember talking to you a couple weeks now. When you were talking, it triggered me. I remember you saying that you predicted one of the 2, and you said if you had to only choose one, you would choose AJ Epinesa.
Yes.
So you definitely got your number one guy back. And I liked Cam Lewis. So scratch those 3 off. I was really hoping for Geno Stone. More on the safeties here in a little bit, but he ended up going to Cincinnati, and I hate that. And then Noah Brown was the wide receiver I really liked, and he ended up re-signing with the Houston Texans. So when it comes to my list, I've sort of gotten what I wanted. The other thing that I expected, and it's coming to fruition if you pay attention to social media, especially Twitter X, shit's getting testy. Fans, content creators, going back and forth, just hyperbole all over the place. A couple of people might say Bean do something, and then content creators jumping on their ass. They know who I'm talking about, by the way. I don't got to say no names. You know who I'm talking about, God damn it. Anyway, just a lot of, I don't want to say tension, just a lot of bannering, a lot of shit talking, stuff like that. Most part, keeping it fun. So that part is expected, but, and I guess it started yesterday with the linebacker, but I want to talk about the receiver. Now, I know you've had your eyes on at least a handful of receivers. This was a little surprising on Wednesday morning. We're thinking DJ Chark, Josh Reynolds, Curtis Samuel, Nick Westbrook, maybe from Tennessee. Lots of guys that I've heard discussions about. One guy I have heard 0 discussions about, or didn't even hear his name mentioned once, was Mack Hollins. And the Bills signed him to a 1-year deal for roughly, I think, around $3 million. Before I go into the spiel about him, what was your reaction when you first heard the news? And maybe throughout the day, as I'm sure you've learned more about the player by reading the thoughts and opinions of others.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like my initial reaction was just kind of like, okay, like it's a guy I've heard of before. I've heard of him from like fantasy football, where sometimes you're looking at a bye week fill in and who's somebody on a free agent wire, and you end up looking at someone like Mack Hollins more than you probably should as a flyer more than anything else. So, as far as guys on the radar, really was not. I say this, like, listen, for who he is, and I know you'll kind of talk about a little bit, like, hey, could end up being a decent player in Buffalo. In some ways, like the one and done wide receivers, at least to me, feels a little
Right.
bit, I don't want to say like I'm over it, because I mean, I'm not. It's not that big a deal if you're talking a fourth or fifth wide receiver, and that's what he ends up being. But
Mhm.
like to see, listen, I know Trent Sherfield did not have the greatest season, but like some consistency of, hey, his second year, his second off season working with Josh, second off season working with Joe Brady, like that part where it's not someone coming in and you're building a rapport from scratch again. But we're not talking about a revolving door at slot receiver or at tight end or at wide receiver 2 or anything like that. So I'm not going to get dramatic about it or anything along those lines. And listen, I hope it works out. But it wasn't anything that was like, there were no high fives going around the room that Mack Hollins signed with the Bills.
Sure. And I'll tell you what, I kind of have a process when this time of year, when the Bills do something in free agency, and I'll openly admit this, I'm locked in on the Buffalo Bills. And speaking of locked in, I'm going to kind of lead into that a little bit here. But I'm not locked into 31 other teams. For the most part, is Joe Marino. So I expect people like Joe Marino to know about players from 31 other teams besides the Buffalo Bills. So I kind of have a process when they sign someone that I'm not all that familiar with. I see the player. I immediately go to Google. I'm sure a lot of you all watching and listening do the same shit, man. You go to Google, look up the stats, see what you can find on the person, and then you probably go to a couple of sources that you trust to give you a good opinion. And like I said, one of them's always for me, Joe Marino. And then the other ones are the guys who cover one, because they're generally, first of all, they do a great job with the film. And, they just know a lot of the nuances of the game. They're really, really good at that stuff. And I go to them, and because they're generally positive too. They're down on the guy. I'm going to be really down on the guy, because they're not down on a lot of guys. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And then you'll see Eric Turner and Prohaska, some of those guys start to break down some film within like maybe an hour or two. And, Greg Thompson will have some great analysis in terms of like the cap and things like that, if it's a good value signing. And then I looked, so I did all that. I was pretty, pleasantly, I don't say surprised, but somewhat impressed. Then I'm like, yo, he played with Atlanta last year. And I am saying names here, but let's just say I definitely have a couple of sources in Atlanta. So I talked to one of them, and I straight up said, what's the 411 on Mack Hollins? And well, it's only a couple sentences. I'll read it to you. It couldn't be any shorter than this. Great. You know what? Where's that swear thing? I got a beeper now. So instead of swearing, it says beep, but I don't feel like looking for it. Great bleeping dude. Good bleeping player. Underused in Atlanta. Really good accolades from people that I've talked to. And then look at his numbers, dude. So he only had 18 catches last year in 13 games. 251 yards. That's nothing. That's Trent Sherfield, Deontay Hardy-ish. But 2022 with Vegas, he had 57 catches for 690 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's a good special teams player. That's the book on him. Good run blocker, and Sean McDermott loves that shit. And he had the 25th best PFF run blocking grade out of 138 eligible receivers who played at least 20% of their snaps. He was 25th out of 138. That's really good. Credit to Pat Moran for doing that research. And then the other thing too, he's just a really good high character player. Just sounds like a Buffalo Bill type of Brandon Bean type of get. You know what I'm saying? As the days went on, I've kind of gotten more impressed with the pick without, I don't want to overstate it. I don't think he's the next Gabe Davis per se, but I like the pickup. I do.
Well, and I think, again, positives too. I know you said before, contract 1 year, $3 million, but actually reported, the term up to $3 million. So,
right.
There's some incentives in there. The cap hit will be less than that, probably will not play into any comp pick formula. So, that part is, it's kind of a minimal signing, similar to like Trent Sherfield last year. Yeah. And you talk about his statistics from 2023 season in Atlanta. I mean, their passing game was just a mess, right? I mean, Desmond Ridder was not the guy. There's a reason why they go out and get, Kirk Cousins to come in at quarterback for 4 years, $180 million. So, so they can try and, create a passing game. So even looking at the statistics where it was just like, for what he was in Atlanta, compared to what he did, in Las Vegas, like you said, the year beforehand with Derek Carr. Like, okay, you can see that this is a guy that can deliver when needed. And the expectations for Trent Sherfield last year were relatively high coming out of training camp, right? The early workouts, Diggs wasn't there. Here's a guy that people were, there were some expectations, didn't really live up to it. That's fine. But maybe this is the 2024 version of what those expectations were.
Yeah, he'll be what you hope Trent Sherfield would be. Look, Trent Sherfield looked good early on. He looked good at camp. And I think some fans, their eyebrows were raised right away because Tyreek Hill was pretty openly upset that Trent Sherfield signed with the Bills. Look, I like Trent Sherfield. I hope for more. I mean, he did have a big play. You can't take that away from him. The Miami game, the finale, that touchdown was huge. The Bills won the division that game. But you got to hold him accountable. He dropped 2 long passes against Kansas City in the playoffs. Had to go. I think, this, I could be wrong. And again, we're taping this at night. Something could change overnight. Something could change during the day or night on Thursday, a couple days, a week or so from now. Maybe they still go get a Josh Reynolds. Maybe somebody like Odell Beckham Jr. is hanging around for so damn long that he decides to take a 1 year stay in the league or prove it, whatever the hell you want to call it, deal. And they could get somebody like that on the cheap. But my general take, and I want to know if you agree with this, when it comes to this offense, when it comes to wide receiver right now, I think so. They get Mack Hollins, okay? I think they're going to draft a wide receiver in the first round. They're definitely going to draft a wide receiver relatively early. The ceiling for that realistically is the first round. Very well could happen. But to me, even doing so, like if they go get Brian Thomas Jr. or A.D. Mitchell or Xavier Worthy, one of those guys, to me, it's like, yeah, for 2024 for sure. But I think that's also as much about ultimately replacing Stephon Diggs as it is, future. You got Diggs and another guy for the next 3-4 years. I feel like this team and Brandon Beane, especially Sean McDermott, they're happy with the pass catchers they have right now. And I think much of the chagrin of at least some fans out there who care about the style points more, I think this is a team that wants to run the football more than they did last year, too. I mean, I think the offensive line move that they did with Morris, which we'll talk about in a few, I think that kind of is a little bit of a hint to me. But I think this is going to a team that, they like who they got with Kincaid and Shakir, and they should. And Cook. Do they really need to go out and spend $9 million on a wide receiver too? A guy like Mack Hollins is going to block well. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's no one out there that you're going to get for $9 million that is worth it, right? I mean, you see Calvin Ridley get a $92 million contract. If T. Higgins is going to be traded for, I mean, it's the draft compensation that you got to put into it, plus the contract on top of it. Like,
no, thank you.
It is not something that will be affordable in any way, shape, or form, right? I mean, you look at the contract that Gabe Davis got, and good for him. 3 years, $39 million, incentives that can take it to 50. So for $9 million, it's not the day where you can get John Brown on a $9 million a year contract,
right?
So if something like that was out there, I'd say, yeah, I can listen to what you're saying. But that was 5 years ago. Like those days are gone. The salary cap is much higher. You're strapped. Wide receivers are commanding so much more money. And I'll even kind of like raise you one here. I don't think it's just drafting one wide receiver. I think it has to be 2. And maybe it's one of those where it's like, yeah, you got to get one in the first round, and then you're getting somebody else in the 3rd or 4th with some of those picks that you have, or even packaging some things to move up again, because it's not just how much time does Diggs have left, but you're replacing Gabe Davis too, right? So it's like, who's that top end guy that can become a wide receiver 1? And then who's that guy that can develop into a wide receiver 2? And that to me is a piece where it's just like, you probably got to come out of the draft with 2 guys, unless there's some move coming between now and the draft that we're just not seeing.
I think a lot of times, Anthony, when it's whether football, just life, it takes a few minutes. You overreact. Lord knows I do it. And then cooler heads kind of prevail.
Sure.
I think when Mack Hollins, like in the moments that he got signed, like if you happen to be having nothing to do and you were just scrolling around Twitter, sitting at your desk, aka what I was doing most Wednesday during the day, a lot of negative reaction instantly. It's like, who? Why? No, because there's bigger names out there. But I get it. I really do. And then maybe it took me a few minutes, like, for kind of to settle in a little bit. But I get it. I think he's a nice player. I think he's going to have a role with this team. They lost Ron Neal, who's a special teams guy. And they lost, who's the other one? I know they're going to lose more guys who are really good on special teams anyway. But he's a good special teamer. He's a gunner. He's a good run blocker. So he will probably play some snaps like Sherfield and even Gabe Davis when they're running the football more. I feel like when we talked about this too, like Stephon Diggs, were they going to restructure his contract? And we agreed that restructuring his contract probably means it's going to be a lot harder to get out from it after this year. Were they to do that? And now we're in the free agency, officially in the free agency, and there's still no contract restructure. It could happen, but I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it and you disagree. But
no, I think it's a break glass.
telling.
I think right now it's break glass in case of emergency. You've got it there. It's at your disposal. You probably don't want to do it unless you really have to. And right, I mean, the reports of Eric Armstead today, being released by the 49ers, and keep an eye on Buffalo coming out, or, if somebody else comes available, or all of a sudden, a name pops up where you're just like, okay, is it a Hollywood Brown or something like that, you're going to have to find some money. You can do it if you need to, but you don't have to do it now just in case. I mean, it's literally like it takes 10 seconds to do that restructure that can open up, what would it be, $13 million
Yeah,
or something
13.
along those lines. So, knowing that that's kind of at your disposal is okay. And even the Trey White, post June 1, that puts you in a situation of just like, that is basically what it is going to cost you to sign your rookie class, and leave you a little bit extra if you need to,
a little bit in the kitty.
Make some functions if somebody gets hurt and you need to sign somebody during training camp. To me, that's also a good thing, because it's like, all right, Bean, you know what? You got this money, but you can't do anything with it right now. So don't get tempted by something flashy that comes across. I'm not saying that he would do that, but it's just like, you're almost like, hey, your rainy day fund. Yeah, it's your rookie class fund. Don't touch it. Nothing can happen with it. And it's just going to sit there until June 1st. Then you can sign all your rookies, do everything else you need to do outside of that.
You used a wonderfully accurate analogy when you said break glass because of an emergency. So let me ask you this. You heard about Eric Armstead. I'm sure a lot of people have. He got released and he was instantly I can't remember the reporter's name, but somebody from The Athletic, very credible reporter too, said in a tweet, it wasn't even like a little throwaway line in the bottom of his, the post about him getting released. In the tweet, talked about him getting released, and the only team mentioned, he said, to look out for, he said, look out for Buffalo. Is a player like Eric Armstead, having Oliver and DaQuan Jones re-signed, is he a break glass in case of emergency worthy type of addition, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I would say yes. And to your point that you made earlier, right? I don't spend all this time studying 49ers tape. So let me just be really clear with that. But when you talk about a defensive lineman that in essence can play all four positions on the defensive line, and you can say, okay, you got Rousseau as a starter, you're going to have Epinesa and or Miller on the other side, and then you've got Ed Oliver and you've got DaQuan Jones. And other than that, you really have nothing. Right? Kingsley Jonathan, okay, fine, or whatever that may be. But to have someone where you rotate players and that they can play all four positions, I mean, that in essence, it's like, yeah, you don't need to sign a Jordan Phillips and a Tim Settle and a Shaq Lawson, because you know what? This guy can fill all three of those positions. And then maybe, yeah, it can be like just hang on to a, Ilianku and a Kingsley Jonathan or something along those lines, because you've got that flexibility and versatility that you need. Oh yeah, and by all accounts, like you said, from the people that matter, he's pretty damn good too. So, along those lines, I like that flexibility that he can do for the defensive line. And then I think it removes any of that pressure to have to do anything too big in the draft when it comes to the D line. And as I was saying before, you can really focus on wide receiver and getting a couple of guys, in those first 4 rounds that can make an impact for you.
Sure. When it comes to those players and Eric Armstead specifically, first he passed the test, like I said, the lockdown Bills, Joe Marino test, the cover one, the Greg Thompson test, all that stuff. He passed that. But in this case, this is a player I know reasonably well. And he's a really good player. I agree with you, by the way. The answer for me also is yes. He is worthy of breaking the glass of an emergency type of signing, as far as I'm concerned. 5 sacks last year. He had 10 in 2019. The one concern about him at this point is injuries. He's missed 13 games over the last 2 years. He tore a meniscus earlier this past season. But I remember him specifically from just recently, the Super Bowl. He was awesome in the Super Bowl. He stacked Mahomes. He had 7 pressures on Patrick Mahomes, which is 7 more pressures than Ed Oliver had in the divisional round against him. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself there. He's a great player. He's also again, the Bills culture, losing some high character guys. This guy is a time running Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee for the San Francisco 49ers. So he's a great dude. And here's the thing. I'm going to give you a hot take here, a little bit of a hot take. We talk wide receiver ad nauseum. I'm going to tell you right now, to me, the interior, the defensive line, the backups are more important than wide receiver. The backups for, say, wide receiver. Here's what I mean. The drop-off between Gabe Davis last year, even when Gabe was healthy, the drop-off between a Gabe Davis and either a Trent Sherfield or Deontay Hardy, Andy Isabella, you name it. I don't give a shit. Justin Shorter, you can name anyone you want. Okay? That drop-off was not as sharp and drastic as the drop-off the Bills' middle of their defense had when Ed Oliver and or DaQuan Jones weren't on the field. When they came off the field and Tim Settle and Jordan Phillips and Poona Ford came on, it was night and day. The defense, the middle of the defense was night and day. And I think the Bills recognize that too. I think that's why they've had some linked interest to other defensive tackles here before Eric Armstead. But I think it is critical for this team right now to have better depth in the middle of the defensive line. I truly do. I think it's more important than wide receiver.
I think that's safe to say. I mean, listen, I think there was a little comparing Gabe Davis and his drop off to Justin Shorter. I'll probably push back on that with you.
That was hyperbole.
But when you talk about it at defensive tackle, it's like, yeah, I mean, listen, those depth pieces did not work the way that you needed them to, right? There was too much of a drop off. And that's a credit to Oliver and DaQuan Jones for, how well they played. But yeah, if you're going to take a swing, I mean, the interior defensive line seems to be so much more critical and important right now than it was 5-6 years ago, right? Where it would just be like, oh, you can get these guys in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, whatever. Not the case anymore. It's become a premium position, and you can tell. I mean, shoot, look at the payday that Christian Wilkins got to go to the Raiders. Like this is something though, but for these guys that are there, they are getting paid, and you know what? Good for them.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I'm not even talking like Eric Armstead is necessarily he wouldn't be a bench guy. You're going to find a lot of snaps for him.
Totally.
And again, not even trying to be disrespectful per se to Ed Oliver, but you're in a playoff game. He's not giving you anything. Get him off the field. But right now you can't. Because what are you going to do? Get Ed Oliver off the field and put out Poona Ford? What are you going to get anyway? You're going to get nothing anyway. You know what I mean? So I love that option. I would rather sign Eric Armstead than I would Odell Beckham Jr.
Totally.
And I know a lot. Well, you and I might be on an island though, because I feel like there's a lot of people out there that would want to punch me in the head for saying something like that. That is like blasphemy to a lot of Bills fans. And I get it. But anyway, we'll see what happens. All that said, I know the Bills have interest, but doesn't mean they're going to sign him. And if I was a betting guy, I would be surprised. I don't want to be too predictive here because I can look really dumb at lunchtime tomorrow. But I'd still be surprised if they signed him.
Listen, if you're going to look dumb at lunchtime, let it be for a reason like this, right? So that's okay. Now, can I ask you a question actually? And
Sure.
you said something before that you feel like Sean McDermott and the Bills, they want to run the football.
No.
Right now they got one running back on the roster.
Right.
It's James Cook, and there is nobody else signed at this time. And I think that is going to be one of those pieces. And, listen, I play the role on social media and Twitter, having fun at the expense of guys like Joe Marino and Jeremy White and Bruce Nolan, of my love of running backs and making an investment. But the Bills are going to have to do something. And I don't think it's just going to be, we'll wait to the draft and take some guys in the fifth and sixth round. Like there is going to be some additions, and I don't know who or what it's going to be. And listen, we know running backs can be had for, under that comp pick formula threshold, say, $2.5 million, that you can get some guys that maybe have some potential or have had some success. So I do think that's a little something sneaky to keep an eye on over these next couple of days.
I think the answer is really easy, and it's just bring back Ty Johnson. Look, there's a lot of names, a lot of fun to talk about, a lot of speculation, a lot of envisioning scenarios in your head. But you know what I like? I like watching a guy that I've seen perform with Joe Brady as the offensive coordinator. I love Ty Johnson as running back too. Just bring him back. I'm actually stunned that the Bills have not re-signed Ty Johnson right now at this point.
Well, I think that one is interesting. Another guy, I mean, listen, and this is me, like I liked him when he was a draft prospect coming out of Boston College, is A.J. Dillon out of Green Bay, right? And kind of that younger version of a Latavius Murray, right? 6'3", 250 pounds, thighs as big as my waist. And it's just like, here's a guy, but he's 25 years old. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Hey, I wouldn't hate it. I would be opposed to A.J. Dillon. There's a lot of running backs I wouldn't be opposed to. I just like the fact that I've seen Ty Johnson in the system, and I've seen him thrive at that position as the backup to James Cook. So I still hope that's ultimately what happens. I'd be happy with that. For somebody, I guess you could tell how I feel about the Bills, where all my priorities are like, bring this guy back, bring this guy back, bring this guy back. Tells me, and should tell you, that I think this team's good enough to win. They were good enough to go all the way last year. Just get a lot of these guys back, add a couple guys, maybe hopefully a little bit more than what they've gotten so far. But I like this team, man. I do.
But I think, listen, it's a shift when you talk about enough of these guys. And, we talked about it with Epinesa, the guys where the arrow is pointing up, right? And like, listen, I love Mitch Morris, Jordan Poyer, Trey White, all of them, what they meant to the Buffalo Bills program. I mean, I don't want to see any of those guys leave, but if we are being real with ourselves, right? Like,
sure,
they are in the downside of their career. And it is funny because we've talked about this in the past, like, when you say like run it back in the year that the Bills re-signed Darrell Williams to a big contract and John Feliciano, and then those guys end up being gone shortly thereafter. Like, sometimes you have to make those hard decisions, and not to give too much credit to the Patriots, but like, you would see that with them. I mean, maybe even like, maybe this guy's got one good year left, but we'd rather get rid of him a year early than a year late. And it just seems like a definite shift in Buffalo. And there are plenty of those young guys on the roster right now that the arrow is pointing up. So that part I can still feel good about, a Greg Rousseau and an Ed Oliver and a Terrell Bernard, Taron Johnson, right? Like, on the defensive side, Christian Benford, like, okay, I can feel good and feel optimistic about things, and not just dwell on the guys that are leaving.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Take a real quick break. Come back. We're going to talk about the other new addition as of this taping to the Buffalo Bills. And I want to spend a few minutes talking to you about a couple of the players that have left, where they've went, and what you think about that as well. So we'll be right back here in just a minute. All right, I am back here with Anthony Marino from Buffalo Rumblings. Today's episode is sponsored, by the way, by Imperial Pizza. And also want to urge you guys, if you haven't done so already, to please make sure you like, comment, subscribe to this video and this channel. Really helps us continue to grow on the video side. All right, so we talked about the newest signing, Mack Hollins, a guy who I ultimately think is going to be better than a lot of people out there who really are just kind of casual fans might think. I'm a big Mack Hollins guy. Nicholas Morrow. They signed a linebacker yesterday or 2 days ago now from the Philadelphia Eagles. He's 28 years old, started 12 games for them last year, even wore the green dot at one point, was calling the plays. The book on him is he's a really good run stuffer, an early down guy. Sounds like kind of like an old or a newer version of like maybe Brandon Spikes. Remember Brandon Spikes? Kind of the same deal. Big thumper, but he couldn't cover anybody worth shit in pass coverage. And I kind of feel like that's the book right now on Nicholas Morrow. I want to let you know that I reached out to Les Bowen. Les Bowen is like kind of semi-retired right now, but he covered the Eagles in Philly newspapers for a couple decades. He's got his own blog now, but long time Philadelphia Eagles journalist. And I reached out via DM, and he was kind enough to respond to me a couple times, and he was pretty blunt. He says, Eagles, I want to quote him actually. Eagles, whose linebackers were awful last year. Maybe it was a scheme, but Morrow was a huge disappointment despite a decent PFF rating. He struggled mightily in pass coverage. There was no appetite for bringing him back. In fairness, maybe there was no appetite for bringing him back because they're going out and spending so much money, signing all these other guys, Saquon Barkley, Gardner Johnson, all these other guys in Philly. But you hear the lowdown on him, Anth. I know you do. Kind of remind you of a couple former Bills right now, AJ Klein, maybe Tyrel Dodson, that type of guy.
Yeah, I mean, it made me think that Tyrel Dodson is probably not coming back to Buffalo. Right. So, I mean, there's been a kind of a lot of back and forth on what kind of contract he would demand. Haven't seen his name out there or linked to anything just yet, but probably based on his play last season. Listen, as you talk about more teams, almost like, is there a shift going back to the running game across the NFL where someone like a Tyrel Dodson is going to have more value than maybe he did over the past couple of years? So that was the first thing I thought. Again, you look at it as a depth signing, special teams contributor. We saw it last year. Okay, hey, Bernard goes down, Matt Milano is out. Like, do you trust a Balin Spector? Do you trust Dorian Williams yet? So here's someone with some more experience to be a part of that room. You talk about the need for some leadership with some of the, the losses that are out there. So to me, it's fine. I haven't even seen any contract specifics, which makes me think it's probably a vet minimum type of contract. Because usually if it is something that's, the agent leaks it, they're going to include the numbers if it's something good that makes their client look good. And if there's nothing out there yet, then you assume that it's nothing too crazy. So I'm fine with it. Again, I look at it as a depth special teams type of signing. And listen, the Bills have a lot of roster spots to fill to get to 90. So yeah, it was funny as people were overreacting to this signing immediately. You see any response from Eagles fans that are like, good, let him go. And, Bills fans are like, oh my God, this team's going to be horrible. Like, just stop. It's like the first afternoon. It's like literally.
I again, with Greg, my man, Greg Tops from Cover One, we were going at it a little bit on Twitter because you're right. Some fans are like, already sky is falling. And he was kind of making fun of them. Although I still feel that those are just a couple morons and not really, I don't think the average Bills fan is all panicky over these signings. Yeah, look, I guess he's the first signing and you spend weeks and weeks listening to the Joe Marinos and the Bruce Nolans and, the Greg and Aarons and hopefully this show as well. You're talking about all these free agents that are out there. Who might get this? And then you're like, the Bills, source says Nicholas Morrow. And you're like, what? Even on Wednesdays, source says, and because you've been fixated on receiver, not you ever. Well, we all have, everybody pretty much. And the name is Mack Hollins. And you're like, but you got to look at it this way, dude. This team a week and a half ago had 20 of their 22 starters, I think, locked up already. I think it went down to 19 and then 18 when they cut Poyer and they cut Morse. However, they brought Taylor Rapp back. That's your Poyer replacement. Yep. Now you're back. So you get that one right back. And then Tim Graham from The Athletic reported almost instantly after Mitch Morse was cut that the Bills plan on moving Connor McGovern to center and Edwards to guard. So those two spots are already locked right back up. So you're back to having 20 spots out of the 22, I think right now, completely locked up. Wide receiver 2 and safety, free safety are the two, not probably, they are the two right now that are a little bit up in the air. So these signings that you're going to get right now, to your point, and you're right, you got to go get your your Tyrel Dodson replacements and your Trent Sherfield replacements. I think Alec Anderson is probably going to get elevated to be that David Edwards this year, that swing guard, that 6 offensive lineman. You know what I mean? So these are the kind of signings I think we should be expecting. Even if you don't love it, it's useful. It's practical.
You know, and I didn't have the time to look it up, but I feel like this happens every year, right? Like your first signing is Mike Tolbert or Frank Gore or, you know, somebody that is just like, again, a 1 year, $2 million signing that people overreact to, like, you know, as if the team is done. So it just, you know, listen, you get it. As you said, there's anticipation. You're excited. You're looking forward to the start of free agency. You want that, at least that one shiny toy, right? To add to things, to be like, this is what's going to make a difference. But, you know, it just hasn't happened yet.
I haven't spent much time stressing about wide receiver because I am fully confident the Bills are going to get at least one, maybe 2 guys within the first 3 to 4 rounds. But I have spent a lot of time thinking about and maybe stressing a little bit is the safety position. And I had a nice long list of guys that I really wanted, starting with Geno Stone, like I said, who went to Cincy on Wednesday. Really high on who's the kid from the Jets who's back with Tampa now? Jeremy White or
Whitehead.
Jordan. Yeah, Jordan Whitehead. God, brain fart right there on the air. But anyway, I really wanted that guy back. There's about 5 or 6 safeties right now that I'm like, the Bills are going to hopefully be in on this guy. And Jeremy Chinn's another one. And then they go to other teams and they've signed. And now we're, I guess, depending on technically 1 day, but in reality, 3 full days of free agency. And Cam Lewis is slotted in right now as your guy. And it makes you wonder. I mean, they're not just going to hand Cam Lewis shit, but is Cam Lewis this year's Terrell Bernard middle linebacker situation where we kept saying, you know, Bobby Wagner's out there, Levante David's out there. All these veteran linebackers are out there to replace Tremaine Edmonds on the cheap. The Bills don't sign any of them. Then they don't draft anybody. And we're like, oh my God, at least I was. The sky's falling, and Terrell Bernard was a stud. Now, he's young and unproven. We didn't know what he was going to be. Cam Lewis has been around. I kind of feel like we've seen what he is. Pretty nice player, though. But just, do you get a little bit of a sense that maybe safety right now isn't as big of a priority to the Bills as it is to me or you or some fans out there?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm not worried about safety right now. And there's a couple reasons, right? So one, and I realize, you know, John Butler moving on as a assistant coach, you know, I'm not forgetting that piece and just giving all the credit to Sean McDermott. But when we have looked at this team over the Sean McDermott tenure, you know, we have seen Levi Wallace, Dane Jackson, I'll include Jordan Poyer in that. Guys come into this lineup and be able to deliver. Josh Norman, who was like nobody wanted in any way, shape, or form. And guys in this defensive backfield like perform. And I don't know if it's scheme. I don't know if it's system. I don't know enough to be able to say that, but they have been able to manage with whoever they have had to put back there. Heck, I mean, we saw Micah Hyde go down in the second game of the season, and DeMar Hamlin fill in for him for the remainder of the 2022 season as a 6th round draft pick out of Pittsburgh. So I don't want to just make it sound like, just throw anybody back there and it doesn't make a difference. But there's something with that. I mean, even when you think when Jordan Poyer then goes to free agency last year, and it's a little bit of he's expecting to get this huge paycheck, and it doesn't happen. And he ends up coming back to Buffalo after hitting the open market. Like, was that a little bit to me of just like, hey, Jordan, you're a nice player, but you're great in this Buffalo Bills system that Sean McDermott has in place. Outside of that, I'm not quite sure. Maybe I'm giving McDermott a little bit too much credit here, but I mean, gosh, we have seen this, Pat, over the years of just like, all right, here's a 7th round rookie and Dane Jackson stepping in. And I mean, heck, you saw the paycheck that he signed for today. Like they're able to make something out of these guys. So I don't know, maybe I'm being a little naive. If Bruce Nolan was on with us right now, I mean, you know, Bruce is all about the defensive backfield, and I am certainly not. He'd probably be losing his mind. But to me right now, I'm not as concerned about it. And the last thing I'll say, I know I'm rambling here, but like guys that are smarter than me, Joe Marino, and Joe Buscaglia have both floated on more than one occasion of like, yeah, maybe you can get by with Cam Lewis and Taylor Rapp back there, and a day 2 type of rookie or an early day 3 rookie that you're developing to see what that competition could look like, and that might not be a bad thing. So,
well, I'll say this much. I mean, if you have any faith at all in Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, they've known since the day after the Kansas City Chiefs divisional loss that Mike Hyde would not be a Buffalo Bill in 2024. So they've known.
We don't know that yet. That is none of that has been confirmed either. So that part's a little
officially. Let's just say I would be flabbergasted if Mike Hyde returns to the Buffalo Bills. Let me just put it to you that way. They've known
for a while. Flabbergasted. I'll give you that.
They've known that there's going to be a change at safety, and yet they're not in any rush to make a move. So that tells you that they know what they're talking about. It's not like they're not forgetting about safety. It's like, they haven't thought about it. You know what I mean? So maybe just the right fit ain't there, or they got other plans. Well, we'll see how it plays out. I'm going to put you out of spot a little bit. Usually when I have Anthony on the show, and this is for everyone out there listening or watching, I kind of give you a rundown. I give you an outline. I say, this is what we're going to talk about. Didn't do that this week. We've both been busy. You've been on the road for a couple of weeks. I want to ask you a question. So right now with the Buffalo Bills, as things stand at this moment, if somebody were to say to you, what do you like right now most about this football team? Like, what's the thing right now when it comes to the Buffalo Bills? If somebody were to ask you, hey, man, I'm thinking about jumping on the Bills bandwagon. Give me something that's great about this team. Like, what do you like most about the Buffalo Bills right now?
Oh, I like most of the passing game. That's easy for me, right? Unlike most people, it's like I still have a ton of faith in Stephon Diggs and the player that he can be. And again, like, a tough drop on a 70-yard bomb that he should have caught away from being the hero of Buffalo. Okay, so, there's still enough there that I see. Khalil Shakir, arrow pointing up, way up. Dalton Kincaid, arrow pointing up, way up. And I look at those two guys, and to myself, I'm just like, yeah, I'm not worried about this. Like, I am optimistic about the passing game that they have. Throw James Cook into the mix as a pass catcher. I'm certainly still have a sense of optimism around Dawson Knox, as much as I don't love the contract that he signed, and still waiting to see, what the restructure looks like. But Dawson Knox is still a trusted target of Josh Allen. Yeah, I feel all right about this passing game. And as long as I feel good about that, I'm going to feel really good about this football team.
That's a very fair answer. I'm going to semi-steal something that you had said earlier when you were mentioning young players. To me, and by the way, Josh Allen would be the obvious answer, of course,
sure,
but that's low-hanging fruit when you say your favorite thing about the Bills is the quarterback, because they got one of the best quarterbacks in the world. To me, I still think I think there's a lot of players on this football team, younger players that are still ascending. They're, to use your word, they're trending up. Like, I think they haven't hit their ceiling yet. Guys like Stephon Diggs and Ed Oliver and even Josh Allen, a few other guys, Von Miller, they're star players, but I feel like that's what they are right now. Like, they're not going to elevate their games too much more. But I look at guys like and Matt Milano, I would include in that group as well. He's already a star. But guys like Terrell Bernard and Christian Benford, and I'll throw Greg Rizzo in there. He's going into year 4, but I still think he's ascending. I still think he become, if he can stay healthy, even a more complete player. Khalil Shakir, you mentioned him. James Cook, you mentioned him. Dalton Kincaid. These are guys that still got room to grow. Joe from Queens and I are kind of arguing a little bit about, the Bills. The Bills might not look as good next season on paper than they did this past year, but it doesn't mean they're not going to be better. And they might be better because guys like Kincaid might hit that next level, or Khalil Shakir and Cook and Bernard, and playing with Matt Milano all year, and DaQuan Jones keeping them clean in front of them. You know what I mean? So I feel like the best football for a lot of these young players is still ahead of them. So that's my favorite thing. Let's kind of flip it a little bit. Now we're going to be Debbie Downer right now. Somebody's like, what's your least favorite thing? Like, what's your biggest worry about this team? What do you dislike right now the most about the Buffalo Bills as things stand?
Well, and listen, it's probably not even about the team, But I just this whole conversation of like, is the Super Bowl window closed? Or is this team a disappointment? You wasted the last 3 years of Josh Allen. Like, shut up. What are you talking about? Like, people act like teams just, win Super Bowls all the time. Like, and I don't know, maybe I've been through enough of this crap with the drought and everything that it's just like, okay, yeah, I've sat and watched this team be an embarrassment for years. So now the fact that they're a contender, of course I want to see them get out of the divisional round. Of course I want to see them win the Super Bowl. Like, I don't look at it and just say like, oh, I'm not disappointed, but I'm not going to look back at this past season and just say that was a complete waste. Like, no, it wasn't a waste. Like, we have fun talking about this team every week. We have fun following this team and watching the games, and Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs and Deion Dawkins and all the stuff that goes with it. Like, my gosh, I'll take this over what that 17 years was 100 times out of 100. So to me, it's that piece, like just the over dramatization of just like everything that you get around every signing that comes that isn't the most marquee name or whatever. It's like, I feel like some fans have just gotten a bit spoiled, and it's like, enjoy this. It's a lot of fun. Your quarterback is arguably the most exciting player in the NFL. And yeah, it's a little bit of a roller coaster sometimes, but there's a reason why there's always a big line at the roller coaster at the amusement park, and nobody gives a shit about the freaking carousel. So come on, man. Like, so to me, that's not even something about the team, but to me, that's the part that just bugs the shit out of me.
Look at that, man. Some of you glass empty Buffalo Bills fans out there got Anthony Marino to say shit on the air. I love it, man. I love it. By the way, going back to my last question too, I didn't show any love for the offensive line. Shame on me. Osiris Torrance and Spencer Brown are also two guys who got a lot of good football ahead of them to even get better. I think my answer would be, and I'm risking being completely wrong, and I'm sure a lot of people might call me out for it and say I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe they're right, because maybe the team might actually be better for doing this. But what I don't like about this team right now is I just get a sense, maybe a little bit of fear, that you got Josh Allen, one of the best, in my opinion, he's one of the best two quarterbacks in the NFL. But if you want to say 3 or 4, that's fine. And I feel like they're going to run the football even a lot more than they did last year. And last year was kind of a lot. This feels to me with the head coach, Sean McDermott, he wants this team in his dream world, in Sean McDermott's fantasy perfect world. The Bills are a run-first football team who's going to run the ball as much as they throw it, ground and pound, play really good defense. Not that there's anything wrong with playing good defense, but run the ball, don't turn it over, game manager to some extent, Josh, and like almost like the 2000 Ravens. Like Trent Dilfer, but if Trent Dilfer had great legs, he could run the football too. That's my dislike about this team right now, my sense. Now, we haven't seen that, so, I'm speculating on how things might go. I just don't, I want to see this team open up. I want to see Josh Allen throw for 5,000 yards. I want to see him throw the ball 30 sometimes a game. Use the run maybe a little bit to set up the pass. Got to keep, the other teams honest. But I don't want to see this become a run-first football team. I don't want to see a 50-50 run-pass distribution. And I know some people might disagree with that and say I'm an idiot. That's fine. But that's what I don't like right now.
I mean, I will disagree with you. I won't call you an idiot because we're too good of friends. But, I think with that, and I understand what you're saying. I also understand when Sean McDermott talks about it. I think it's just like, you just don't want to be a one-dimensional team. Like, you need to have the respect of the opposing defense that, you know what, honestly, they don't know what you're going to do. And there were times, I mean, and listen, it worked. So don't get me wrong. We're like, oh, the Bills came out and they, their first 15 plays were all passing plays. Like, okay, hey, that's fine if it's working. And even when you look at last year, like, you can talk about the run game, but I don't think anyone was complaining when they kicked the crap out of the Dallas Cowboys and ran the ball down their throat the entire game. And it was just like, hey, 7-8 yards a clip. Until you can stop it, we're going to do it. So I can understand that piece as opposed to where it's been in the past. And it would just be like, oh, it's 2nd and 1, hand off to Zach Moss, 3rd and 3. Like, it would just be predictable and they wouldn't be able to make anything happen and kind of inflict that. But I do hear what you're saying. Like, because listen, I said the thing I'm most excited about is the passing game. So, I should be, in line with what you're talking about. I just think it's probably one of those things that maybe it's a little bit more fear that it can happen than reality. And I hope I'm right and you're wrong with this one, because I wouldn't want to see that happen.
See, you know what? I was concerned about Bills Mafia getting after me on social media after hearing this and thinking I'm dumb, but you beat them to it. So congratulations.
I don't think you're dumb. Like everybody thinks that. And like, they make the investments in running backs and all this type of stuff. Like I totally get it.
By the way, so we're late into the night. We're pretty much at 10:30 p.m. now here on a Wednesday. And Anthony's kind of got, one eye on the show and one eye on the Twitter feed just to make sure that we don't potentially miss anything nuts. I'm glancing a little bit here now myself. Before we go, handful of Buffalo Bills have found new homes. Actually, I want to talk about one player specifically because I feel like the fact that everything happened at once was just wild. I said, with the exception of 2000 when they cut Bruce, Thurman, and Andre all at the same day, that this was one of the wildest offseason days of my lifetime. And I wasn't, a lot of people were like, well, these are 3 Hall of Famers and these guys are just 3 good players or whatever. Wasn't comparing the players. I was just talking about big chunks of your team, part of the fabric of your team, all getting cut pretty much at the same time. It was just like a boxer, just a bunch of body blows, combination punches all at once. But the one, I feel like if they would have been done one at a time, maybe over the course of a couple of days, it wouldn't have been, as big of a deal. But Mitch Morse was the surprise. Yeah. So I actually wanted to ask you about him. And going back to my point, and this kind of leads credence to it to be about how the team wants to run the football more. I love Mitch Morse. And it's not the only reason. Money is the biggest reason. Age is another reason that the Bills have moved on from him. But a part of me also thinks that Connor McGovern moving to center and Edwards in the guard. Edwards is a really good run blocker. McGovern's not a great run blocker, but neither was Morse. So now you had Morse and McGovern, 2 kind of crappier run blockers. Now you only got 1 instead of 2. McGovern's an elite pass blocker. But I kind of feel like that move in part, kind of led to my mindset that I think this team's going to run the football more. And Tone Bucks made a really good point on the show a couple of days ago. Do you buy this too? Aaron Kromer's role on this team. How much of a voice do you think Aaron Kromer has in that front office? Like, if he didn't want Mitch Morse gone, or I shouldn't say if he didn't want him gone, but if he wasn't good with it, if he was going to pound the table to keep Mitch Morse, do you agree, probably stays? Or they don't trade Ryan Bates if Aaron Kromer's pounding the table?
Yeah, I mean, I would think he's got enough of a voice, right? And Edwards played for him when it was part of his line with the Rams. So him re-signing. And again, one of those re-signings none of us had an issue with at the time. But yeah, I was shocked. I mean, Mitch Morse to me, again, was still playing at a high enough level.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly a leader on that team, right? When you talk about accountability, a guy that will sit in a press conference, answer every question, and my gosh, make you feel better about every situation after it. I mean, the guy's like 29 years old. I mean, if you told me he was like 57, I'd believe you, just based on how just kind of wise he comes across when he speaks. And like everyone else, when they traded Ryan Bates, I had no issue with the Bates trade, right? Because it was just like, all right, like, hey, you got Edwards back, you get a 5th round draft pick, free up a bunch of cap space for 2025. Sure. Like, you'll be able to do some more stuff next year. He didn't even play a snap for you barely last year. Nope. So, okay, I'm totally fine with that. The one thing that none of us know, and it can be with any of these guys. I mean, probably not with Trey White because with the injury made it a little bit different. But like, with a Poyer, with a Mitch Morse, did the team go to them and ask them to take a pay cut? Did the players say like, listen, I've done that before. I don't want to do that. I want a new opportunity. Or did they not? Like, did they just straight out cut the guy? Like, we don't know what took place with those conversations. We can guess, we can speculate. Even someone like Mitch Morse, it's like, well, gosh, he was going to make like what was it? I mean, they saved $8.5 million from cutting him.
I think he had 10.5 or $11.5 million cap hit he had coming
Right.
from.
So, you look at that and it's like, okay, well, then he goes and signs a 2-year, $11 million contract. So it's like, okay, you were kind of overpaying him for what the market dictated. So you just kind of, you get it. But yeah, I don't like it, but I get it.
Yeah, same. I feel the exact same way. I truly do understand it. And going back to that we hear it all the time, the Bill Belichick, get rid of him a year early instead of a year late. And you bring up a good point. We don't know. I wonder how much of Mitch Morse being released is financial and how much of it was maybe a switch in philosophy, thinking the offensive line might actually be better with McGovern at center and Edwards in at guard. But anyway, Mitch Morse and Gabe Davis both go to the Jacksonville Jaguars. That to me is interesting. Leonard Floyd goes to the 49ers. Respect to him because he didn't pull no punches. He said right after the season, he's going where the money is. I respect that. Totally respect that. Our boy Dane Jackson signed today, Wednesday, I should say, with the Carolina Panthers. 2 years. Dude, he got starter money. Like, I think he's going to start. Good for him too, by the way. But yeah, so he's a starter. Sarai Neal went to Miami, whatever. The one guy I wanted to ask you about, saved him for last year to get before we end the show. Jordan Poyer goes to Miami, 1 year, $2 million contract. Got so many mixed feelings on this. I truly do. How do I say it? I got no problem with Jordan Poyer. I like Jordan Poyer. I don't give a shit what he said about taxes and all his other stuff. I like Jordan Poyer. He was a great football player. He's a stand-up guy. He was inspiring to a lot of people who have battled addiction issues. Did a lot for the community. Always loved Florida. Always wanted to be back in Florida. But he made Buffalo his home, and I'm proud that he was a Buffalo Bill for 7 years. Love the guy. Okay, and I'm not mad at him for signing with Miami because he wasn't like last year. If he would have signed with Miami and the Bills offered him the same money, we found out Adam Schefter said Bills offered as much or even more money, but he wanted to go to Miami. Then I'd be like, you know what? Screw him. That'd be the fan mentality of me. But that's not the case. Dude got cut. He got cut last week and he signed with the team that wanted him, but it's the Miami Dolphins and it's his wife who wanted him to be a Miami Dolphin and is already tweeting about the Miami Dolphins, as she should. I mean, that's her man's team and whatever. Sure. I get all that. My point is this going to get really ugly for a little while before it gets better? Down the road, Jordan Poyer, most people are going to love Jordan Poyer again someday. But do you get a sense that this is heading down ugly boulevard right now between Jordan Poyer, his brother, his wife, and fans for the next handful of months or year or two, maybe?
I mean, are there going to be some knuckleheads out there? Sure. Should it? No. You know what I mean? Right. Like Jordan Poyer, you can argue is the best free agent signing, at least ever in my memory, of the Bills. And I say that not from, hey, you signed someone to a big contract and they worked out. I mean, his first contract, he was getting like $2 million a year.
Yep.
And comes into Buffalo and plays at a Pro Bowl type of level. Guy, I mean, listen, if anyone even had any question about Jordan Poyer beforehand, he was in a van, somebody else drove, but like him and his family for 15 hours to get to Kansas City to play with a punctured lung because he couldn't fly. Like, if anyone just said, like, listen, he's out for this week, he can't play, no one would have faulted the guy. Like, I don't know what it's like to have a punctured lung. I have to imagine that is incredibly painful. And in that moment, in doing that, it was just like, oh my gosh, like this guy will do anything for this team and to help them win. So it was painful when he got cut, kind of felt that it was coming. I hoped it wasn't going to be that situation, maybe that like dime roll that he was playing towards the end of the year. Maybe he takes a pay cut, sticks around almost as like a third safety leader in the, locker room, all that type of stuff. But that was really more wishful thinking. But the Bills cut him. So it's like, if he wants to sign someplace else, he can sign anywhere he wants to. And here's the thing that's interesting. And again, I haven't seen anything of like, a report of, well, he took less money because he wanted to be with the Dolphins and that's home. I mean, it's a 1 year, $2 million contract. Like, there's no even guarantee that he makes a roster with that. I mean, listen, I think he's a good enough player that he should make the team. Like, I'm not saying any of that, like there's still something left there that even if it's as a reserve, like he deserves a spot on a 53-man roster. But, whatever might happen, that is not something that says, oh, you can't cut somebody on a 1-year, $2 million contract. So anybody that's out there, I mean, listen, I get it if you feel kind of bitter, you hate the Dolphins, you this and that, but like, you don't need to go at the guy and his family. Like, what? Everybody just, social media is the worst sometimes.
It can be. It can be. Jordan Poyer is my favorite free agent sign. I think he's the best free agent signing the Bills have ever had.
Yeah.
He was an outcast when he came to the Buffalo Bills in 2017. I don't want to put unfair pressure on Nicholas Morrow, the guy the Bills just signed, but essentially, in a way, that's what Jordan Poyer was. He was a guy who barely started, kind of was like a so-so player, came to Buffalo and became a star, became an all-pro player through the course of several years. He's one of my favorite Bills players of all time, on the field, off the field. And I also don't think he's cooked either, by the way. A lot of people were saying that. He still has some. Is he Jordan Poyer like 2019 to 2021? Absolutely not. Jordan Poyer 2022 was half crippled trying to play football. He was terrible in 2022, but he was completely broken down. I thought he played pretty damn well last year, especially when in that specific role. Hell, he's one of the few guys on defense that actually made a play against the Chiefs in the playoffs. But at the end of the day, dude, being old enough, and I know you're old enough to remember this too, feels very Thurman Thomas-like to me. In 2000, Thurman got cut by the Bills, and he admitted it later he did it out of spite, but he signed with the Dolphins. He was washed. He was done 1 year. In fact, I think he went on to say later he regretted ever signing with Miami. But it just felt dirty at the time. And no disrespect to Jordan. He ain't doing nothing wrong. And again, neither is his wife for being proud of him and tweeting Miami shit. But there's going to be some hateful, resentful Bills fans out there that are taking that very personal. But it's still, I got to be honest, he's not wrong, but it still feels a little bit dirty to me. Just one of my favorite players because he's going to be, getting Miami hyped and talking to fans and, ready to play against the Bills, assuming he makes the team. It just feels ugh to me.
But you know what? Again, the Bills cut him. That's where he wants to be.
Sure.
It's where he wants to be. And you know what? If he went to the Chiefs, you'd feel weird about it. If he went to Baltimore, if he went to the Jets, or if he went to New England or whatever. And it's just like, I don't know, maybe this is just me. The Dolphins don't concern me too much right now. Like, you know what? The Bills have had their number and that's fine. I don't look at it. It's just like, oh my gosh, they added Jordan Poyer. That's going to be the difference in the AFC East or whatever it can. And listen, I wish Jordan Poyer nothing but the best, man. Like this guy, like, but yeah, I have no ill will towards
Agreed.
him.
I agree. A lot of people are glad. My point was, I think there's going to be some people who do. And I think, again, his brother, his wife, maybe even himself, I don't even think he's on Twitter right now, though, they're going to fuel the fire a little bit. I'm just saying, not that they're wrong for doing it. I'm just saying that's how it's going to play out short term. I just hope at the end of the day, when he's retired, that he's going to be remembered as one of the great Buffalo Bills players, certainly of this generation, and not some turncoat. I hope revisionist history tells the story correctly at the end of the day when it comes to Jordan Poyer, because he deserves that. That's all I'm saying. And yeah, dude, the Dolphins are a mess. They lose Christian Wilkins. They lose Robert Hunt. They lost Brandon Jones. They lost Andrew Van Ginkel. They've lost a lot of good players. Guys like Jordan Poyer, Shaq Barrett, whatever. They got a long way to go.
But like we're saying with the Bills, it's Wednesday, man. Like they got a lot of time to.
And that's how I was going to end the show by saying this. If you're a Bills fan right now, a little bit stressed out that you don't feel like they're doing anything of significance, I would say this: what are the Kansas City Chiefs doing right now? Pretty much nothing, as we speak, at least anyway. They haven't really done anything yet. That could change tomorrow, just like it could with the Bills, but they haven't done much. The Ravens lost Stone. They lost Patrick Queen. They haven't really done a lot. They just traded their starting right tackle to the Jets on Wednesday. So a lot of these great teams aren't really doing much either. So
listen, my guy Matt Warren put it best. He said last year the Bills' best free agent acquisition signed in June, Leonard Floyd. Like it was June, and that was the guy that had the greatest impact, the best season. So like, I'm good, man. If it's week 1 and not a whole lot has changed, yeah, then maybe I'll stress out with you a little bit.
I'll give you to end this, a corny, cliche, cheesy, but yet kind of accurate, homeristic take here with the Buffalo Bills. You look at their stretch run last year, the winning streak, to go from 6-6 to winning the division, to winning a playoff game, to being up at halftime against the Chiefs at home in the divisional round. And you look at that roster and that football team, and you could say the best free agent that the Bills have added is Matt Milano. He comes back he wasn't on that football team for that run, the playoffs. One of the best players on the team. Again, I know that's kind of corny to say that, but he was injured. So it's kind of like he feels like a new addition to this team when you look at what they were last year compared to what they're going to be in 2024. That's all I'm saying.
No, I'm with you.
All right, guys, that's going to do it. My man, Anthony Marino. Good to have you back, man. I'll let people know on the show, but we might be moving to a different day. So look out for that. And on tomorrow's show, I'm going to have Anthony Prohaska from Cover One. Not only is he going to do the show, but he's actually going to be here live with me in studio. So look for that on Friday. Talk to you then.